On March 12, 2022, I was admitted to the hospital after being assaulted by John. Even now, I can't comprehend how the man who once treated me like his life could change so drastically.
You have multiple fractures in your ribs, mechanical corneal damage in your right eye, an avulsion fracture in your left ankle, and various other semi-permanent injuries. Bruises all over your body.
These injuries testify to the harsh reality of what happened. As I write this, my body and mind are still in immense pain. The sensation of my hair being yanked, the punches that landed on my flesh, bones, and heart haunt me, causing me to wake up in terror repeatedly.
I can't bear to see you in this condition. I'll refer you to a psychologist.
After the diagnosis, the doctor told me I had post-traumatic stress disorder and gave me a very candid piece of advice.
In cases like yours, most of my patients end up choosing to separate. As a psychologist, we don't make decisions for others lightly.
The doctor used the word decision. I couldn't make up my mind, or perhaps I kept immersing myself in the happy days of the past. Even though the doctor said I might suffer permanent damage, I couldn't help but think about the past. Lying there in silence, staring blankly at the ceiling, tears suddenly welled up and streamed down my face, causing excruciating pain in my right eye.
Mom, I don't know what to do, John.
I wanted to say something to my mom, who was by my side, but the words got stuck in my throat.
I know, sweetheart. I know.
The next day, there was a disturbance at the hospital. John insisted on discharging me, completely disregarding my inability to move. "We're leaving now. Get up!"
She can't move, John. What are you doing?
During the discharge, my mom finally lost her patience and argued with him as he carelessly moved me.
Stop it! You're hurting her!
Seeing my mom pushed to the ground, I screamed and tried to get up, but the searing pain caused me to pass out. When I woke up, a thought kept recurring. Why has this marriage come to this point? What did I do wrong? Enduring the pain, I called my mom, moved my body, and placed my fingers on the keyboard. Sarah never thought she would fall in love with John. Sarah met John during her junior year in college. He was 6 years older. They met through a local gaming group.
The candied hawthorns from Yuan are pretty famous. Could you bring me some?
Sure! After sending that message, John went offline. 3 days later, he appeared at the school gate, sweating and dragging a suitcase. "Here, I brought you the candied hawthorns. Came straight over as soon as I got off the train." Because of this, they became friends. John was cheerful, his smile capturing the sunlight, but Sarah never thought about being with him due to the age gap. "Sarah, I liked you." He pursued her fervently, even getting along with her roommates, often bringing small gifts for everyone. Once, Sarah fell ill and had to get in for a drip at the hospital. John showed up with homemade food.
Thank you, John.
Her heart was captured at that moment. Her friends often teased her.
"Sarah, if you don't want John, I will."
Go ahead, I'm not stopping you.
But then she thought, if he married someone else, would she be okay with it? She realized she wouldn't be. Finally, in the first semester of her senior year, they became a couple. John gave her the key to his rented apartment. When Sarah didn't have classes, she would go over to tidy up and cook, but she never stayed the night, nor did they cross any boundaries. Until the day she graduated. That day, she made what she thought would be the last meal for him. "Don't leave tonight." He had said this many times before, and Sarah had always refused.
John, I've told you, no marriage, no deal.
This was her final boundary. John was silent for a moment, then seemed to make a decision. "Mark, I'm going to your house. Mark really came, carrying large bags of gifts. Watching him chat with Mom and Dad in the living room, looking so harmonious, filled my heart with indescribable sweetness.
I thought, if I married John, every day would be this happy.
John stayed at my house for 3 days. After 3 days, he had to leave, and I took him to the station. Go back. No need to see me off. He waved at me. I waved back, and then turned to leave. At that moment, Sarah. I instinctively turned around, and John pulled me into his arms. I will work hard to establish myself in Ashley, and then let's get married. John's family conditions were not great, and it was very difficult to establish oneself in Ashley. But since he said so, I believed him. Afterwards, I returned home in a daze. As soon as I walked in, Mom looked at me seriously.
Sarah, it's not that I look down on the less fortunate, but marriage is something that should be between families of equal standing.
I knew what Mom meant. When John was here, she asked him a lot about his family, and knew that his family was not wealthy.
I am marrying for love, not for money.
Mom fell silent upon hearing this, and glanced at Dad.
How about this? Tell John to buy a house in Ashley, just the down payment will do. With a house, you can get married.
I was overjoyed at the time, and immediately told John the news. It took him a long time to reply. Sarah, I don't have that much money. John's family wasn't well off. I had known this for a long time. Back in 2019, although the housing prices in Ashley weren't as high as they are now, they were still astonishing for an average family. After much deliberation, John and I decided to focus on Dejeongdong, an area in Ashley where the housing prices were relatively lower. After all, Dad didn't specify which part of Ashley we had to buy in. There was a homeowner in Dejeongdong looking to sell a second-hand house near the subway station with a down payment of $70,000. When John heard this number, his face visibly darkened. He pulled me aside. I've only saved $20,000. I didn't want to start a fight or debate whether a man saving $20,000 in 6 years was impressive or not. At that moment, I had only one thought.
I'm marrying for love, not for money.
Looking back now, I realize I had already fallen into John's trap at that time. He had concealed his financial situation from me. But that's a story for another time. A few days after viewing the house, I went home alone and had a long talk with Mom and Dad. At the end of the conversation, Dad asked me,
Is John good to you?
I nodded.
So, on Valentine's Day in 2019, John and I got engaged. Dad gave John a dowry of $40,000 plus a car. John had his $20,000, and his parents contributed another $10,000, just enough for the down payment. At the engagement party, Dad drank a lot. Fueled by the alcohol, he told John,
I'm entrusting my daughter to you. If you don't treat her well, I won't let you off.
I wonder, if Dad were still alive today, would John dare to be so reckless? John's greatest skill was turning his poverty into a weapon. After our engagement, John used 700,000 yuan to buy a house in the East River area, and we started paying the mortgage together. The monthly mortgage was 7,200 yuan, while John's monthly income was only 6,500 yuan. At that time, I had just gotten married and hadn't had children yet. Many companies were reluctant to hire me, fearing I would take maternity leave soon after joining. It took me a long time to find a job that paid 4,500 yuan a month.
John, can we discuss the mortgage? Could you pay a bit more while I pay less? Just until I get a better job.
John's eyes turned red immediately. Honey, I haven't told you this. Actually, my parents couldn't even come up with 100,000 yuan. The 100,000 yuan they gave us before the engagement was borrowed from relatives. My parents can't repay the debt, so they I was stunned. It was the first time I had heard of parents doing such a thing.
How could they do this? I want to confront them right away.
I've already said everything that can be said. It's okay, honey. I'll repay the 100,000 yuan debt. Anyway, I've settled in Ashley now. From now on, it's just the two of us. As for my parents, let them be.
Looking at the man in front of me, who seemed on the verge of being crushed, I didn't say anything more. That day, I transferred 3,600 yuan to him, splitting the mortgage evenly between us, which seemed fair. After that, John really didn't go home during Labor Day, Mid-Autumn Festival, or National Day. He stayed in Ashley with me and my parents. During this period, John's parents called him a few times. While having dinner with me, he would say into the phone,
Mom, I really can't come back. Work is too busy right now.
After hanging up, he would wink playfully at me, and I couldn't help but laugh. At that time, I truly believed John loved me more than his parents. I never considered that someone who could deceive his own parents could also deceive me. His family never owed 100,000 yuan. I once believed I married for love, but later I realized I had married a deceiver.
The renovation of this old house is terrible. We need to redo it.
But we don't have the money for it, John.
At that time, even a modest renovation in Ashley would cost around 180,000 yuan, and John could only scrape together 30,000 yuan from all his savings.
Let's go to your parents' place for a meal. Maybe they can help us out.
A meal costing 100,000 yuan. This might have been the most expensive meal my dad had ever had in his life, but John was still not satisfied because he was still short of 50,000 yuan.
I've already given enough money. No more.
We can save 50,000 yuan by not renovating one of the rooms.
This peculiar room remained vacant. Once the renovation was done, it was time to get furniture.
Here's 30,000 yuan for the furniture, John, and 10,000 yuan to improve Sarah's living conditions.
Thank you. I'll use 5,000 yuan and the 10,000 meant for Sarah for the furniture. It'll be like my family contributed 15,000 yuan.
I had never fussed over these matters before, but I never imagined that these things were far from the lowest John could go. On June 30th, 2020, my dad had a car accident. According to my mom, he went out for a walk as usual, and while crossing the street, a large truck suddenly came towards him. My dad couldn't dodge in time, and half of his head was severely injured. When he was taken to the hospital, half of his brain was immediately removed.
As long as the brainstem is intact, the body's functions could be maintained, but the chances of waking up are very low.
My mom and I cried our hearts out in the hospital, with only one thought in mind: treat him, no matter the cost.
Your dad will never wake up. Continuing the treatment is a bottomless pit.
Finally, after hearing my mom and me discussing selling the house, he had a private conversation with my mom. I didn't know what he said to her at that time, but a few days later, my mom agreed to sign the papers to cease treatment. On the day of my dad's burial, all the relatives we knew came. My mom, with red eyes, held my hand.
Sarah, live a good life with John from now on.
I cried and instinctively looked at John, who was talking to his mother, as if he hadn't heard anything. My dad may have passed away, but the wedding still had to go on. After all, he had been looking forward to my marriage before he left. We scheduled the wedding for the second day of the National Day holiday, leaving all the arrangements to John and his family. I stayed at home, dreaming of a grand wedding. Who would have thought that just before the holiday, John's mother suddenly called to say that the hotel had canceled our reservation due to the pandemic, and no other hotels had availability on that day.
I have some bad news. The hotel canceled our reservation because of the pandemic, and we can't find another venue.
I was at a loss for what to do. At that moment, John's mother suggested an alternative.
There's a spacious ancestral hall in John's grandfather's village. With some decoration, it could serve as a wedding venue. We can hire the best local chef. The food will be just as good as any hotels.
Hearing John's mother's confident assurance, we agreed. Little did I know that I would end up experiencing the simplest wedding of my life, and I would be the bride. On October 1st, 2020, National Day, which also coincided with the Mid-Autumn Festival, my mom and I took a bus to the place John's mother had mentioned. I can't recall the name. Something like a bay, a place without even paved roads. The village buildings were all very old, with one house even collapsed and left unattended. Of course, I tolerated all this, thinking it was just for the wedding, not a permanent stay. However, when I saw the wedding venue arranged by John's family, my heart sank. It was a completely abandoned ancestral hall, with cobwebs hanging from the eaves. That night, I had a big argument with John in front of his family and my mom.
I would rather postpone the wedding than have it here.
Saving money isn't a bad idea. A girl might only have one wedding in her life, and the man in front of me was considering saving money. I wanted to leave, but my mom stopped me.
With Dad gone, we only have John to rely on in the future. Try to be more understanding.
John's parents also tried to persuade me, taking all the blame upon themselves.
It's not that we don't want a proper wedding. The pandemic caused the hotel to cancel, and this was the best place we could find on short notice.
They said a lot more, but I didn't listen. I cried, hugging my mom for a long time.
Serious the next day. The wedding proceeded as planned. Sad when I woke up at 5 in the morning, my eyes felt sore, not from lack of sleep, but from crying too much. I followed John in the wedding car to the bridal shop in town to put on the wedding dress and get my makeup done. After that, we returned to his home. Serious, are you ready for this? Sad there were only 2 wedding cars. John and I were in the first one and the groomsman was in the second. The groomsman was someone from John's village, apparently a last-minute choice. As for bridesmaids, there were none. Yes, I didn't call for any bridesmaids. I even told the friends who had promised to come not to, because I felt ashamed. Sad back at John's home. After a series of traditional rituals like stepping over a fire basin and serving tea, I was sent to the bridal chamber. I stayed there the whole day, lost in thought, shedding tears, and thinking about Dad. Sad if Dad were still alive, would he have held my hand and said, "Daughter, let's not go through with this wedding." But Dad could no longer be by my side. Only John's mother was there with me. She had someone bring in several baskets of wedding candies and packaging boxes, and she sat beside me, wrapping the candies. Cheerful, you know, having the store wrap these candies would have cost $400, but by doing it myself, I saved that money. Serious, I thought, John is truly her child. I could see his traits in her. Sad, I didn't respond, just sat there in a daze, occasionally wiping away tears. I sat from morning till night, until I could cry no more. Then someone came in to inform me that it was time to go to the wedding venue. Serious, so I lifted my dress and, led by John's mother, walked along the dirt road to the ancestral hall. There was no master of ceremonies, no music. John and his family had haphazardly stuck dozens of small balloons on the wall, which I heard they had stayed up all night to arrange. Hopeful, come on, dear. Let's go greet the elders. Serious, I followed John, led by his mother, to toast the elders one by one. During this time, his mother introduced many people to me, but I didn't remember a single one. I just wanted this nightmare to end as soon as possible.
Someone once asked me why I didn't divorce John when his family held that kind of wedding. I thought about it for a long time. There were many reasons. Maybe it was because he became the only male in our family. Maybe it was because I had invested so much in him. Or maybe it was because I still loved him at that time. After the wedding, John and I returned to Ashley and continued with our lives. We had a mortgage to pay, And we also had to repay the 100,000 yuan that John's parents had borrowed. At that time, I believed he really owed that amount. To make ends meet, I switched jobs, and my salary increased from 4,500 to 8,000. The boss was an old acquaintance of my dad, and they had a very good relationship. When my dad was still alive, our family wouldn't have considered leveraging this connection. But now that he was gone, if we didn't use it, who knew if it would still be there in a few years? That wedding completely wore down my spirit. John also changed jobs. He was better off than me, having secured a civil service position in the Westlake District with a total annual income of over 100,000. Our family was overjoyed, and that evening, I took him to my mom's place for dinner. My mom prepared a feast, and the whole family enjoyed a harmonious meal together.
John, congratulations on the new job. We're so proud of you.
Thanks, Mom. It's a great opportunity for us.
However, after dinner, John suddenly told us that he wanted to sell the house in the Great River East and buy a new one in the Westlake District. His reason was that the Great River East was too far from the Westlake District, making his commute inconvenient.
We need to sell the house in the Great River East and buy one closer to my job in the Westlake District.
With John's civil service salary, as long as we paid a down payment in the Westlake District, we could afford the mortgage. But what about me? My job was also far from the Westlake District. I asked him this, and John's response was,
But, John, what about my job? It's also far from the Westlake District.
You can move back to your mom's place.
When he said this, his tone was devoid of any emotion. That night, we started arguing again, neither of us willing to back down.
How can you be so selfish, John? We should make decisions together.
I'm thinking about what's best for us. This commute is impossible for me. This time, John didn't win, not because he softened, but because the house hadn't been owned for 2 years yet, and selling it would incur taxes. But soon after, John still moved to the Westlake District and rented a place for himself. Now that he had a civil service job, he received a housing allowance, making it affordable for him to live there. There are many things in the world that can defeat love: reality, time, distance. In the love between John and Sarah, all of these factors were present. When they first moved to the Westlake District, John would come back every Friday, and they would spend the weekends together. But that only lasted for a few months. In 2021, John's visits home became less and less frequent, and Sarah, in turn, felt increasingly insecure.
I started monitoring him. He had to report when he woke up, when he went to work, when he ate, and even when he was resting at home. We even had to video call. But despite all this, I still couldn't save our love.
On March 12, 2022, a Saturday, John said he had to work overtime and wouldn't be coming back. Early in the morning, Sarah was in the kitchen with Mom, preparing vegetables.
Sarah, how long has it been since you last saw John?
We video called just last night.
Mom looked at her with disappointment.
How about this? I'll make some dishes, and you can take them to John for lunch.
Sarah nodded. With the lunchbox Mom prepared, Sarah took the subway and then transferred to a bus. By the time she reached John's workplace, it was already past 11. She deliberately didn't contact John, hoping to surprise him. However, it was another male colleague who was on duty.
John isn't on duty today.
Sarah was stunned. She hurried to John's place and knocked on the door for a long time, but no one answered. She had no choice but to call him. Thankfully, he answered.
Where are you right now?
John seemed to sense something. He fell silent. A lie requires countless others to cover it up. Over half an hour later, John appeared, drenched in sweat.
You shouldn't just show up unannounced. I was inspecting work with the higher-ups. I had to rush over here.
I looked at him coldly. Without further explanation, he took me back to his workplace. There, a colleague on duty apologized to me with a guilty look.
I'm sorry, honey. I didn't explain clearly. John was supposed to be on duty with me today, but then he was called away by the boss.
Whether he believed his own words or not, I certainly didn't. In an empty conference room, John and I had another argument.
You're being unfaithful, John.
Don't make baseless accusations, Sarah.
We argued and argued until he finally said, exhausted,
Sarah, why don't you join the organization too?
I nodded. That night, I didn't leave. I stayed at his place, and we finally had some long overdue intimacy. I asked for more several times, and soon he was exhausted, falling asleep beside me. I lay there with my eyes open for a while, then quietly found his phone and unlocked it with facial recognition. There were many messages, mostly from work groups, but one casual chat group caught my attention. Opening the chat history, I saw a recent message from him.
Getting married back then was impulsive. If it were now, I could definitely find someone with a stable career like mine.
I felt dizzy all of a sudden. So, John wanted me to join the organization because he thought I wasn't good enough for him anymore. Suppressing my overwhelming emotions, I continued searching and soon found another message he had sent to a colleague named Alice.
I really think we're a good match, both at work and in bed. If I hadn't married early, I would have pursued you.
You can get a divorce.
My mind exploded. I threw the phone at John's face and cried out.
John! How could you do this to me?
John woke up with a start, seeing me like this. He quickly understood everything.
Sarah, let's get a divorce.
The tension in the room was palpable as Sarah and John faced off.
We should get a divorce.
Those 5 words felt like a sharp knife stabbing into her heart.
John! Do you even have a conscience?
John didn't respond. He just silently started getting dressed.
John, answer me.
She lunged at him, but her blows were weak. With a flick of his hand, she fell back onto the bed.
Sarah, can you grow up a little? I was just fooling around outside. This kind of thing is pretty common nowadays.
He picked up his phone, seemingly to send a message.
John, are you planning to see that woman again?
John's expression finally changed. He punched her in the right eye. Sarah, are you out of your mind? All my work data is on that phone. Sarah clutched her eye, tears streaming down, feeling like she might lose vision in her right eye.
You still want to work? I'll go to your office tomorrow and make a scene. Let's see if you can keep your job.
In reality, tomorrow was Sunday, and there would only be a few people on duty at John's office. Making a scene wouldn't achieve much, but she said it just to scare him. But John wasn't scared. Her threat only provoked his aggression. You think you can threaten me? He lunged at her, grabbing her hair and hitting her, each punch landing heavily. She had no doubt he could seriously harm her. But he didn't. A neighbor called the police. She was taken to the hospital that... I just went to change my dressing, and now I'm back to continue. I stayed in the hospital for 3 days. During that time, I saw a psychologist, with Mom by my side. John, on the other hand, ended up at the police station. I don't know what he went through there, but I do know that after he came out, he never mentioned divorce again. Instead, he decided to handle my discharge from the hospital himself. His reason was typical. He said the hospital fees were too expensive. All the doctors believed I wasn't fit to be discharged yet, but he didn't care.
Sir, your wife is not ready to leave. She needs more time to recover.
This is our family matter. Mind your own business.
The doctor had no choice but to have him sign the discharge papers. John had completely lost his sense of decency. He grabbed my hand and dragged me off the hospital bed, then threw me into a wheelchair.
John, stop this. She is not well.
Stay out of this, old woman.
Mom couldn't stand it and stepped forward to argue with him. John pushed her away. Mom fell hard to the ground. "Ma," I screamed as I tried to get up, but the excruciating pain made me pass out. When I woke up, I found myself still in the hospital. As for John, I heard he was taken away by the police again. This man has gone mad. Now, it's no longer about whether he wants a divorce. It's about whether I want one. I do. He can mistreat me, but pushing my mom is unacceptable. I must get a divorce. And on March 27th, 2022, I handled my own discharge paperwork. After leaving the hospital, I didn't go home. Instead, I asked Mom to push my wheelchair and take me to the company.
Are you sure you want to go to the company right now? You should be resting.
My boss, Mr. Smith, is a local from Ashley. As I mentioned before, he has a good relationship with Dad. More importantly, before starting his own business, he worked at the same place as John. When we arrived at the company, I asked to see Mr. Smith.
It's good to see you out of the hospital. How can I help you?
Mr. Smith already knew about my situation. I asked him if he could have John dismissed.
Just having him resign is too easy on him.
Mr. Smith handed me a contact. The person on the other end didn't say who they were, just sent me several screenshots before blocking me. I looked at the screenshots. They were all of John's messages in a certain group chat.
Women, you have to deceive them. I told my wife I owed $100,000, and she immediately agreed to split the mortgage with me. Don't flaunt your wealth, you know? When I got married, I said I only had $20,000, and my wife immediately told her dad, and the bride price was raised to $40,000. What did I see in my wife back then? Just that she's a local from Ashley and her family has some money. When we got married, I had Mom cancel the hotel and switch to a shabby ancestral hall in the countryside. Guess how much we saved?
There were also many photos of him lying naked on a hotel bed with an unfamiliar woman, his face clearly visible. I knew the woman must be Alice, but I didn't care about those. My attention was entirely on the last image.
It's a pity. My father-in-law had a car accident, and we spent a lot of money on him. I don't get it. He couldn't be saved, but my wife wanted to sell the house to keep him alive. For what? I went to my mother-in-law and talked her out of it. If we kept throwing money into that bottomless pit, how could I live?
Seeing this image, my eyes turned red, and I gripped my phone tightly with both hands. As the saying goes, a strong dragon cannot suppress a local snake. Normally, John wouldn't dare to insult me like this, but with my dad gone, leaving just my mom and me, he began to look down on my family. Little did he know that even a lean camel is bigger than a horse. That day, I had a long conversation with Uncle Smith. Afterward, I went to the police station, not to report John, but to bail him out.
John, let's get a divorce and set each other free.
John was taken aback and instinctively wanted to refuse. It wasn't because he couldn't bear to leave, but because he wanted to get more out of it. I understood his intentions, so I offered him a deal he couldn't refuse.
After the divorce, I won't cause trouble at your workplace or reveal your secrets. Transfer the property in Dajiangdong to me, and I'll give you 700,000 yuan. That way, you can use the money to buy another house.
The house we bought in 2019 had appreciated by over 1 million yuan by 2022. After selling it and paying off the mortgage, John would still get at least 600,000 to 700,000 yuan. I knew he had secretly saved a considerable amount of money. With this additional 600,000 to 700,000 yuan, He would have enough for a down payment in any area of Ashley. As long as his job in the civil service remained stable, he wouldn't have to worry about the mortgage.
Where did you get the 700,000 yuan?
My mom sold her house.
Though in reality, the money was borrowed from Uncle Smith. John took the bait but demanded 1 million yuan instead.
1 million yuan, or no deal.
1 million is too much, John. How about 750,000?
750,000? You can't be serious. 900,000 at least.
Fine, 800,000. That's my final offer.
On April 4th, he happily divorced me, taking the 800,000 yuan without looking back. I didn't set any traps for him. On April 5th, John bought a house in the Westlake district. The house was a second-hand property, priced at 900,000, but it was 20,000 cheaper than the market price. John felt he had struck a great deal.
I can't believe I got this house for such a good price.
What he didn't know was that from the seller to the sales agent, everyone was Uncle Smith's friend. We anticipated that John would buy a house, so we deliberately set the price 20,000 lower to lure him in.
Once he buys the house, our second phase of the plan can begin.
On April 7th, John was dismissed from his job. The reason given was inappropriate personal conduct. The person who reported him wasn't me. It was Alice.
John, you crossed a line, and now everyone knows about it.
This incident caused quite a stir at the workplace. Everyone knew Alice reported John because of a video, but no one knew where the video came from.
Did you hear about John? Alice reported him because of some video.
In fact, on the night of our divorce, Uncle Smith arranged for someone from John's workplace to take him to some inappropriate places with many attractive ladies. They secretly filmed a video. Then, through some connections, the video was sent to Alice.
I can't believe John would do something like this.
This was easy because Alice was also a local in Ashley. Uncle Smith passed the video through 4 or 5 hands before it reached Alice. She had originally hoped to marry John after his divorce, but after seeing the video, she was utterly disgusted.
I thought I knew him.
So, there were only 2 choices left. Either John leaves, or she does. Alice couldn't bear to lose her job, so she chose to have John leave.
It's either him or me, and I'm not going anywhere.
At first, John didn't suspect that I had set him up because Alice and I were enemies, not friends. On the day he was dismissed, I heard that John went to confront Alice and even got physical.
How could you do this to me, Alice?
Stay away from me, John!
When I heard this, I couldn't stop laughing, tears streaming down my face.
Oh, John, you have no idea how deep this goes.
On Wednesday, John called me, questioning if I was behind it all.
Did you set all this up?
To be honest, John is indeed a clever person. He doesn't have many enemies in Ashley, so it's easy for him to suspect me. But I'm not foolish anymore.
If I had that kind of power, would I have let you bully me for so many years?
John fell silent.
Don't lose hope. This will pass.
John hung up the phone. I put down my phone, laughing out loud with joy. I knew he was nearing his breaking point. After all, the $90,000 down payment hit him right where it hurt. Even if he had some savings, the monthly mortgage pressure would soon become unbearable. That afternoon, Uncle Smith also called me, updating me on John's current situation.
John is still job hunting. Given his previous annual income of over $100,000 and the burden of his mortgage, he now scoffs at jobs offering $6,000 to $7,000 a month. But honestly, with the current economic downturn across all industries, finding a job that pays over $10,000 a month with his skills is no easy feat.
Of course, whether it's $6,000 to $7,000 or $10,000 to $20,000 a month, the outcome would be the same. I still have the video. Any employer who hires him, I could easily send it over.
But there's no need for that just yet. My revenge is far from simple.
On April 10th, John called me again. I knew exactly why he was calling. I had posted a picture of my room on my social media with the caption, "I will try to get used to being alone." John was still on my friends list. I had deliberately not deleted him to provoke him. Sure enough, he called.
Sarah.
What's up?
John chuckled.
Nothing much, just suddenly thought of you.
I barely managed to hold back my disgust and simply replied, John, do you know that I think of you too, every day? I think about how you're going to pay off the mortgage, how you're going to find a job.
John, I think about you, wondering if you'll default on the loan or sell the house, if you'll stay in Ashley or move to another city in shame. These thoughts are what keep me going every day.
That night, John said a lot of sweet things, more than he had in the 3 years we were together. I listened, feeling both nauseated and amused, trying to stifle my laughter.
Are you doing well?
If I were doing well, would I post such a message on social media? I knew John was asking the obvious, and I pretended not to know. I wanted him to think I wasn't doing well.
Not bad. Being alone isn't so bad.
This was actually the only truthful thing I said that day, but John thought I was being stubborn.
Don't be so tough. I saw your post.
I wouldn't have posted it if you couldn't see it. It was set to be visible only to you. I pretended to be startled.
Did I really forget to delete you? Wait a moment, I'll do it now.
John quickly intervened.
No, don't. Can we still be friends?
Who wants to stay friends with someone like you? I thought this while softly replying. On April 11th, John called me again today. Honestly, if I weren't sure he doesn't read Jihu, I wouldn't dare post this here.
Hey, guess what? I found a job. They're paying me $6,000 a month.
John was very happy today. His excitement was palpable.
And if I do well, my boss promised a raise by the end of April.
I couldn't help but think, well, Ashley is indeed a big city. It won't let him starve. I first congratulated him with a smile, and then asked which company he joined. With a hint of curiosity, I inquired further.
That's fantastic, John. Which company did you join?
It's called Future Tech Solutions. They seem pretty solid.
He told me the company's name without any hesitation. I casually sent the company's name to Uncle Smith, and he replied with an OK emoji. John, enjoy your day today. I hope you can keep smiling through this April.